Sarah, how long do you plan to keep living like this? No future, no reputation, nothing at all. Her father's voice rang out, clear and cold, breaking the illusion of a warm family dinner. Everyone stopped eating. Her mother sighed softly, and her brother and sister exchanged a concerned glance. Sarah just sat there, silent, her hand gripping the napkin under the table as if it was the only thing keeping her from breaking down. That moment, once again, tore through her chest. Even though she was used to it, even though she always saw it coming, each time she was questioned like that, it felt like her heart was being crushed. Those words were a reminder that in her family's eyes, she was still the lost one. Someone who didn't follow the mold, who didn't belong. Sarah grew up in a family where success was measured by titles, stability, and a prestigious career path. Her father was a renowned doctor, her mother a respected writer. Her brother was a top lawyer at an international firm, and her younger sister was pursuing postgraduate studies at a prestigious university abroad. Every member of the family seemed programmed to walk the right path. Successful, stable, admirable. But Sarah had always felt different. She loved beauty. She loved creativity. While her classmates doodled simple drawings, Sarah was blending colors, creating depth, building forms. She could spend hours crafting a design that only she fully understood. She never dreamed of wearing a white coat or standing in a courtroom. She dreamed of a small studio where she could create designs that would inspire the world. When she finally mustered the courage to say she wanted to be a graphic designer, no one supported her. Her father outright rejected the idea. That job has no future. It's a frivolous pursuit for people who don't want to work hard. Her mother, though gentler, couldn't hide her disappointment. You have potential. Why would you choose such an uncertain path? But Sarah didn't give up. She firmly applied to an art school, a decision that shocked the whole family. During her 4 years in college, she worked part-time jobs, studied day and night, endured disapproving looks from relatives, and constant murmurs from her loved ones. Yet step by step, Sarah proved herself. After graduation, she got a job at a creative media design company. Clients loved her projects, and some were even featured in design magazines. But to her family, all of that seemed faint, as if none of it was respectable enough. Whenever she came home, Sarah felt like an outsider. Dinner conversations always revolved around her siblings' accomplishments, current affairs, medicine, or law. When she tried to share about a new project, like the time she designed a poster for a national environmental campaign, all she got was a brief, before the conversation shifted elsewhere. Once, she brought home her latest design, hoping her father, who once had a good eye for aesthetics, would give some feedback. He glanced at it, then set it down. "This isn't bad, but you should consider studying something more practical." Sarah gave a strained smile, but inside she felt crushed. She knew that to them, her passion represented instability, a sign of immaturity. They loved her, she knew that, but their love always came with expectations, with conditions, with silent comparisons. Gradually, Sarah withdrew during family gatherings. She still came home, still smiled, still helped her mother set the table, still gave presents to her nieces and nephews, but she spoke less. The creative world she lived in never seemed to have a place in that house. And yet, in that loneliness, she learned how to stand tall. Sarah built strong relationships with colleagues and friends who shared her love for art. She was invited to collaborate on bigger projects. She taught design to underprivileged youth, creating a small community where everyone felt seen and heard. Though her heart still ached from being compared and dismissed, Sarah slowly realized, to be yourself, sometimes you have to stand alone. And in her heart, a question remained unanswered. Will there ever be a day when her family sees her not as the child who took the wrong path, but as a woman who had the courage to step off the path laid out for her? After deciding to pursue her passion for art, Sarah officially stepped into an entirely new chapter of her life. She began building a small creative design company, pouring into it all the passion and belief she had. Years of relentless learning, experimenting, failing, and rising again had given her the resilience to walk a path few dared to take. Sarah's company specialized in brand graphic design, not as stable a field as law or finance, but one where she felt truly alive. Each design wasn't just work, it was a piece of her soul. She helped small businesses tell their unique stories through visuals, from roadside cafes to independent artists launching for the first time. She was proud of what she did, but deep down, a quiet fear lingered. Would her family ever truly understand? Then, the answer came sooner than she expected. When Sarah announced her new company, hoping for encouragement, what she received instead were skeptical looks. Her father was the first to speak. "Have you really thought this through? Things like design, they're temporary. You'll see, people can't live off passion forever." Her mother said nothing, but the slight shake of her head and the quiet look in her eyes stung more than any scolding. To her, success always came with stability and social recognition. A youngest daughter freelancing in design? Just a rash decision. The silent tension simmered until the first family gathering after she launched her business. Sarah still remembered that day clearly. The old house filled with laughter, the smell of grilled meat, the wooden chairs in the backyard she used to swing on as a child. But this time, something felt different. While everyone chatted and laughed, she stood alone in a corner of the room, lightly gripping a plastic cup, her eyes gazing out a misty window. The conversations flowed: work, kids, real estate, investments, but no one asked how she was doing. No one asked how the company was going. Then David, her older brother, a prominent lawyer, broke the air like a courtroom statement. "Sarah, do you really believe that tiny company of yours has a future? That's not a career. That's a hobby." The mood dropped. A few relatives gave awkward chuckles. Sarah bit her lip, saying nothing. She wanted to explain how hard she'd been working, the projects she was nurturing, but she knew they wouldn't listen. They had already boxed her into the label of the one who strayed from the mold. Every time she tried to open up, eyes would look away, or sighs would follow. Even her younger sister Julia, once her closest ally, now stayed silent. A silence heavy with unease, as if supporting Sarah was somehow the wrong thing to do. In the months that followed, the distance became more pronounced. The calls became rare, the texts reduced to cold, clinical questions. Is your company still running? Are you making enough to live? Each question, though brief, was laced with doubt and disappointment. No longer concern, but tests, quiet warnings. Sarah stopped being invited to family gatherings. On holidays, she would only see pictures online. Her mother surrounded by her children, everyone raising glasses and smiling brightly. And she, like a name erased from the list. At first, she was heartbroken. How could loved ones turn away just because she chose a different path? She had always believed that family was a place that welcomed you back, no matter what. But now, even that place had no room for her. On long nights, Sarah sat alone in her small office. Watching the soft yellow light cast over an unfinished design, she wondered, was I wrong? Am I just being stubborn? But then reading messages from her clients. "Thank you. You made me feel more confident about my brand." She knew she wasn't. She began rebuilding a new circle. Grateful clients, peers in the industry who understood her, a community of people living through their passions. And slowly, Sarah stopped seeking her family's approval. Though she still loved them, she understood now that love does not always come with understanding. She learned how to stand firm in solitude, because only by stepping out of her comfort zone did she truly begin to find herself. After being rejected and seen as a failure by her family, Sarah knew she could no longer live in a house where every wall echoed with criticism. The quiet dinners, the disappointed looks, and especially Emily's final words, "Mom, you're holding me back, making me fall behind," felt like the last knife in a heart already full of scars. Sarah packed her things in silence. Just a few small suitcases, a handful of clothes, some books, and the paintings she had created that no one in the house had ever cared about. She rented a small house on the outskirts of the city. It was old, with creaky doors, peeling walls, and a musty smell, but to Sarah it was a blank canvas. No one gave orders, no one judged, no one made her feel like a burden. The first days were painfully empty. She often woke in the middle of the night from unfinished dreams, family dinners with laughter, young Emily running to hug her. And then everything would fade. But Sarah knew that if she wanted to find herself again, she couldn't look back. She started with small things, cleaning the house, hanging up her favorite paintings, fixing an old chair she'd bought from a flea market. Every little action was a quiet declaration. This is my space. This is my life. Sarah was also determined to revive her long-lost dream to become a creative designer. She had once loved painting, once considered a career in graphic design, but life and responsibility had pushed those dreams aside. Now, with no one calling her fanciful or unrealistic, she gave herself permission to try again. She signed up for online courses, stayed up late learning design software, rebuilt her portfolio, and sought her first clients through social media. It wasn't easy. There were days she couldn't afford to pay the electric bill, having to turn off the lights and heat to save money. Times when she sent out designs and never heard back. Moments when she sat still, asking herself, am I doing the right thing? But each morning, when she opened the window and let the sunlight in, she reminded herself, this is my choice. I'm living honestly. And that was something she had never felt while living with her family. Gradually, her efforts began to bear fruit. A few small clients started to come. They didn't care how old she was or what her past looked like. They only wanted creativity and heart. And that Sarah had in abundance. She started earning enough to get by, enough to maintain her little house, and most importantly, enough to believe she was no longer the failure people once labeled her. But external success didn't erase the emptiness inside. On certain afternoons, looking out the window and seeing mothers walking hand in hand with their children, her heart ached. She missed Emily. Not the distant Emily of today, but the little girl who once clung to her after nightmares, who once made birthday cards by hand out of colored paper. Sarah understood that love couldn't be forced. She couldn't change Emily, but she could learn to love herself first. She no longer waited for apologies or hugs from her daughter. Instead, she chose to forgive. Not for Emily's sake, but for her own. Forgive herself for all the years she abandoned her own needs to meet others' expectations. And so in that little house, Sarah didn't just rebuild her career, she rebuilt herself. Brick by brick, brushstroke by brushstroke, step by step. She began to feel peace, a peace not given by others, but born from knowing she was finally living true to her own heart and dreams. That winter was colder than the years before, but inside Sarah, a quiet flame began to burn. Not loneliness anymore, but a longing for connection, for the first time, not through blood, but through the heart. After months of living alone, Sarah began to step out of her comfort zone. She signed up for a community art club in a nearby town, not to become a great artist, but simply to be around others, to have conversations without judgment, to be heard without needing to explain. There, Sarah met Helen, a woman in her 60s with silver hair and eyes that smiled like morning sun. Helen had once been an art teacher, lost her husband early, and her children now lived far away. Then there was Mateo, a middle-aged Latin man who had left accounting to pursue photography, and Ling, a Vietnamese woman in her early 30s who lived alone and spoke little. Each person was a different puzzle piece, different in age, culture, and circumstances, but somehow all of them were looking for the same thing: empathy, acceptance, a sense of belonging. Sarah didn't expect that quiet afternoons of painting together, sharing homemade cookies, or talking about the weather, a beautiful photo, or a childhood memory would become the foundation for building a new family. Not one defined by titles, but by genuine affection. They began to grow close. Sarah and Helen often spent hours in a small street cafe talking about books, youth, and the pain of loss. Mateo taught Sarah how to shoot with a film camera. On Sunday mornings, they wandered the park together, capturing moments of quiet beauty. Lynn, though quiet, always showed up in the most tender ways, like leaving a pot of porridge at Sarah's door with a simple message: don't forget to eat. These people, though they didn't share a surname or a roof, loved each other sincerely and unconditionally. No one in the group had to earn care. No one needed to prove their worth. They were simply themselves, and that was enough. One evening, as they gathered to celebrate Helen's birthday, Sarah sat quietly, watching everyone laugh, raise their glasses, and tell stories. Without realizing it, she began to cry, not out of sadness, but from happiness. For the first time in many years, she truly felt like she belonged. People don't need blood to be family, Helen had once said. Sometimes a hand to hold when you're weak or a hug for no reason is worth more than any title in the world. Sarah had once believed that after being abandoned by her own daughter, she would never feel love again. But now, surrounded by people who weren't bound to her by blood yet cared deeply, she realized true family is when you can be yourself and still be loved. Her friendship with Helen, Mateo, Lynn, and the others she met along the way helped Sarah heal the deepest wounds in her heart. She was no longer the mother left behind, but a strong, compassionate woman capable of rebuilding a life from ashes. And so, family, for Sarah, no longer meant something written on paper. It became the people willing to walk beside her through storms and sunshine. It was the small kitchen where they cooked and shared stories of their lives. It was the hugs shared through tears or the laughter sparked by silly moments. She had lost a house, but found a home. She had lost a blood tie, but found hearts that beat in rhythm with hers. Sarah's new life was not always easy. Even though she had started over in a fresh environment with a new family bonded by friendship, she couldn't escape the challenges life continued to throw her way. Each day for Sarah was a battle, not just financially, but emotionally. She was no longer part of what people called a family. There was no one she could lean on but herself. Everything had to be handled on her own. The first and most pressing issue was money. She no longer relied on anyone, no more support from family, no stable income like before. Sarah's company, though it had shown signs of early growth, was still very small. She had to do everything, from designing graphics, finding clients, to managing the finances. In those first few months, she stayed up late working until exhaustion. Sometimes she didn't even have enough to pay the rent or had to cut down every expense just to get by. Unexpected costs also came her way. Once, her computer broke down, forcing her to spend a large sum to repair it. There were months with no projects at all, leaving her nearly drained. At those moments, she felt like she was standing on the edge of failure. But Sarah didn't give up easily. She knew everything came with a price, and she accepted the struggle, just to keep her dream alive. Though finances were always a worry, what weighed heavier on Sarah was the loneliness. Despite having a circle of close friends, there were still nights when she stared out the window and felt empty. She missed the warmth of a family's love, the moments with her mother, the casual conversations with her ex-husband about nothing in particular. All of it came rushing back. She remembered the early days of living alone, when cold wind passed through curtainless windows, when she ate dinner by herself. No one to ask how her day was, no one to share with. At those times, Sarah couldn't help but reflect on what she had lost and the choices that had led her to such solitude. But no matter what, she couldn't return to the past. Sarah knew she had to face this loneliness to become stronger, to rediscover herself. Slowly, as her business started to receive small projects from independent clients, she began to regain her confidence. Then one day, Sarah landed a major project from a startup company. It was a turning point, an opportunity to work with people who not only respected her skills, but also valued the creativity she brought to the table. It was a big win for Sarah, but it wasn't easy. The project came with intense pressure. Sarah had to not only complete the work, but take full responsibility for every aspect, from time management to client communication. Still, she made it through. After many sleepless nights and waves of anxiety, Sarah delivered the project on time and with high quality. The client praised her work, and she earned a significant payment, money she had earned entirely through her own effort, income no one could dismiss or take away. With every challenge she overcame, Sarah grew stronger. There were still days of exhaustion, still moments when she wanted to collapse, but she had learned how to pick herself up and keep going. There was no one to save her, no one to lean on, but because of that, Sarah discovered she was capable of more than she had ever imagined. One evening, as she looked back on everything she had endured, Sarah felt proud. She hadn't given up, even when things had felt too hard. All the struggles had helped her grow. Every painful trial had been a catalyst for her to realize her true worth. The challenging early years had passed, and now Sarah could look back on her journey with pride. Every step, every decision she had made, was built on a foundation of perseverance and lessons learned through failure. Work was no longer a burden. It had become her passion, her driving force toward greater success. After countless late nights and stressful months, Sarah finally began to see the fruits of her labor. Her company was no longer just a small name in the graphic design industry. Gradually, thanks to her relentless creativity, Sarah's work started to gain attention. Clients began seeking her out not just for her technical skills, but for the unique and creative style she brought to every project. One of Sarah's first clients was a startup looking for a website design that stood out completely from anything else on the market. Sarah worked tirelessly for weeks to complete the project, and the result exceeded all expectations. The client was not only pleased, but also recommended Sarah to several other companies, triggering a steady stream of small, consistent projects. Those early clients may not have been big names, but they were important stepping stones. Each completed project brought new connections, new lessons, and most importantly, the confidence to move forward. Slowly, Sarah realized that the hardships she had endured weren't insurmountable. They were valuable experiences that had helped her stand firmly on her own 2 feet. She hadn't just built a company, she had created a brand, one with a strong personal identity. One of the biggest changes in Sarah's life was that she no longer did everything alone. At first, she had to manage every aspect of the business herself, from design to finance. But now she had started hiring people to help. Delegating work was not easy, but Sarah understood that to grow her company further, she needed a team. The people she hired weren't just coworkers. They became companions on the journey she had chosen. They understood and shared her vision, and together they built a stronger company. The biggest turning point came when Sarah's company landed a contract with a major tech firm. It was a golden opportunity, not just because of the financial reward, but because of the recognition it symbolized. When the contract was signed, Sarah knew her company had officially stepped out of the shadow of small startups. She had built a trustworthy, competitive brand. Looking back on the path she had taken, Sarah couldn't help but feel proud. Her company now had a talented team, a steady flow of clients, and increasingly large projects. But success wasn't just measured in client numbers or profits, it was also reflected in her satisfaction with the work she was doing. She no longer feared empty days or worried about paying bills. She had built a life of freedom, a job she was passionate about, and a future she had crafted for herself. Still, Sarah never forgot the struggles she had faced. She remembered the lonely days when there was no one to share her joys or sorrows with. But it was those very days that had helped her grow, that had made her realize the true value of her hard work. She understood that success never came easily, and that it wasn't a final destination, but an ongoing journey. One day, as she sat in her office, Sarah realized she had achieved what she once only dreamed of. But she wasn't stopping there. She still had bigger dreams, new creative projects she wanted to explore. Her company now had a strong foundation, and it was time to experiment with bolder ideas. She didn't just want to maintain what she had built. She wanted to take it to new heights. After years of fighting alone, when Sarah finally began to achieve success, something inevitable happened. Her family, those who had once abandoned and criticized her, started to recognize her worth. Sarah's achievements were not only gaining attention within her industry, but were gradually drawing the attention of her family as well. They began to hear about her company, the projects she had completed, and the prosperity she had built with her own hands. This left them feeling confused, because in their eyes, Sarah had once been just a fragile, helpless girl, incapable of standing on her own. But now she had become a strong, confident, and successful woman. At first, Sarah didn't want to face her family. She had learned that her happiness and success didn't depend on their approval. But over time, as calls from her mother, her sister, and her father began coming more frequently, Sarah felt a growing conflict inside. She couldn't forget the days of rejection, the times they criticized her for not living the life they wanted for her. The wounds caused by her family were still there, and they weren't easy to ignore. And yet, deep down, she couldn't deny that a part of her still longed to be loved and accepted by those closest to her. One day, while working in her office, her mother called. Her voice sounded different, no longer filled with judgment or blame. "Sarah, can we meet?" her mother asked. And although she wasn't fully ready, Sarah agreed. She knew the meeting wouldn't be easy, but she also understood that if she wanted to fully move forward, She needed to face her past. They met at a quiet cafe where her mother sat across from her, looking into Sarah's face as if searching for answers. "You know, Mom," Sarah began, her voice sincere, "there was a time I thought I couldn't live without my family's approval. But then I realized I have to live for myself, not to please others. I don't want to hold on to resentment, but I also can't keep feeling like I'm a disappointment." Her mother stayed silent for a long moment, as if weighing every word Sarah said. Then she spoke. "You're right, Sarah. Your father and I were wrong not to support you. We didn't understand you and couldn't accept your choices. But I've come to see that you're stronger than anyone else in this family, and we judged you too quickly. I'm sorry for not being there when you needed us most." Those words felt like a blade cutting through an old wound, but they also marked the beginning of healing. Sarah didn't reply immediately. She felt the truth in her mother's words, but she also knew that forgiveness wasn't something that came easily. The years had built a wide gap between them, and while her mother's regret softened the pain, Sarah understood that only time could rebuild what had been lost. "I've learned a lot over the years, Mom," Sarah said, her eyes filled with resolve. "I've learned that change isn't always a bad thing. It's often how we grow. And I've learned that loving yourself is the most important thing. I can't live for anyone else's expectations, even if it's family or society." Her mother nodded gently, still a bit uneasy, but visibly relieved to finally acknowledge the mistakes of the past. They sat there in silence, not distant anymore, but not entirely close either. There was no hug, but understanding and emotion hung in the air. It was a small but meaningful step forward, one that could bring Sarah and her family closer again. After that meeting, things didn't magically become easy, but Sarah began to open her heart more to her family. She invited them to visit her office, shared new projects with them, and even involved her mother in some of the company's activities. Gradually, her transformation also inspired change in them. They no longer saw her as a fragile daughter in need of protection, but as a strong, independent woman capable of building a life of her own. In turn, Sarah learned how to forgive. She realized that family isn't always perfect, and sometimes the people we love most can hurt us without meaning to. Forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. It meant accepting the past so she could move forward. She was no longer haunted by rejection or harsh words because she understood now that her life belonged to her, and the only approval she truly needed was her own. As Sarah looked back on her long journey, she realized that everything she had gone through wasn't just a battle against her family's rejection or the struggles in her career. It was a process of learning and growing. Only when she began to accept herself was she truly able to move forward. Sarah was not just the product of her achievements, but also of the lessons she had learned from failures, setbacks, and relationships that had tested her. One morning, as she sat in her office looking out the window, Sarah suddenly noticed a profound shift in the way she viewed life. In the past, she had lived trapped in memories of being criticized by her family, of feeling undeserving of their love. But now, she no longer felt stuck in that pain. She had learned to let go of wounds that couldn't be changed, and instead, she focused on what she could control. She realized that in order to build a new kind of family, not just one of blood, but of friends, colleagues, and meaningful relationships, she needed to learn how to love and care for herself. Self-acceptance was not easy, especially when she had once felt like she wasn't enough. But it was the first and most important step toward creating a happy and fulfilling life. Through her experiences, Sarah also came to understand that forgiveness isn't only for others. It's for yourself, too. She had once blamed herself for not being able to please her family, for not living up to their expectations. But now she knew that she wasn't always the one at fault. She had done what she could within the circumstances she was given, and if her family couldn't accept her, that wasn't her burden to carry. Sarah's journey of growth also meant confronting unresolved issues with her family. Although she had begun rebuilding a relationship with her mother and had partially accepted the changes within her family, she couldn't deny that old wounds still remained. The times they criticized her, the moments they hurt her self-worth, these were parts of her past that couldn't simply be erased. But instead of avoiding these issues, Sarah chose to face them. One day, Sarah decided to invite her mother to her home, not for a celebration or special event, but simply to talk, heart to heart. She knew that in order to heal their relationship, she had to open up and address the unspoken pain. When her mother arrived, they sat together in the living room. There were no accusations or anger like before. Sarah began the conversation with a simple question. "Mom, I want to know, what do you truly think of me now?" The question might have caught her mother off guard, but it was also an invitation to finally speak the truths that had long been buried. Her mother hesitated for a moment, then sighed and began to share her thoughts. "I was wrong, Sarah. I didn't understand you. I didn't see what you had to go through. I thought you needed to live the way we did, but you've shown that you can stand on your own, build your own life. I'm very proud of you, and I regret not supporting you sooner." As Sarah listened to her mother's words, a strange feeling welled up inside her. This wasn't easy forgiveness, but it was an important acknowledgement. She was not a failure, and her family was no longer the ones standing against her. Instead, they were trying, however imperfectly, to understand and accept her for who she was. From that conversation, Sarah realized that forgiveness wasn't something you achieve in a single meeting or with a few words. Forgiveness is a process, and so is growth. She couldn't change the past, but she could change how she faced it. She could learn to love herself, forgive herself and her family, and from there, create a new future, one no longer defined by old wounds. The relationship between Sarah and her family gradually began to change, not as a complete replacement for what had been lost, but as a rebuilding from the fragments of the past. She began to learn how to maintain her own boundaries while still staying connected with those she loved. She no longer felt the need to accept everything just to be loved. She had learned to love and respect herself, and that was the key to creating a new kind of family, one built on respect, understanding, and genuine love. After rebuilding a life of her own, Sarah felt a strange sense of freedom. She was no longer bound by the rigid rules and traditions her family had once followed. Although she couldn't deny the importance of the values that had shaped her throughout the years, she now realized that freedom, the ability to choose, and the respect for differences were even more vital. That was why Sarah decided to create a new tradition, one she could be proud of and feel free living within. Sarah began with the smallest details of her daily life. She no longer held big family gatherings during the holidays where everyone had to follow outdated customs. Instead, she organized simple get-togethers where family, whether by blood, friendship, or shared experience, could join in on activities they genuinely enjoyed. There was no pressure to dress formally or to participate in games or conversations that didn't interest them. It was all about connection, sharing, and mutual respect. One of the first traditions Sarah established was a monthly dinner where everyone could share their stories and personal experiences. There were no required topics, no rules about what should or shouldn't be said. Everyone was encouraged to speak freely about whatever was on their heart, whether it was a funny story, a sorrow, or an unfulfilled dream. Sarah understood that it was in these moments that real bonds were formed and deepened. These evenings weren't about being perfect. They were about being honest and being oneself. She also introduced one important rule for this new tradition: no judgment. This wasn't just about avoiding criticism, it was about complete acceptance. Sarah knew that one thing she had always missed in her old family environment was mutual respect. People often tried to force others to live according to their own expectations, and when those expectations weren't met, rejection followed. But Sarah understood that differences are what make life rich and meaningful. Everyone has their own path, and the freedom to choose that path must be respected. Another key part of Sarah's new tradition was the creation of an annual celebration called Freedom Day, held at the end of every spring. On this day, everyone, family, friends, community, was invited to take part in whatever activities they loved, whether it was sports, arts, or nature trips. But the most important aspect of this event was that nothing was mandatory. Sarah didn't require anyone to join in anything they didn't want to. She simply welcomed everyone to enjoy moments of freedom without pressure or constraint. Everyone could do what made them feel happy and comfortable. For Sarah, the most important thing wasn't about crafting a tradition full of rules and structure, but rather about encouraging people to live truthfully and authentically. That's why she also reminded her loved ones that not everything in life had to follow a set mold. They didn't need to live by paths laid out by society or family. They could choose the life they truly wanted. Everyone had the right to be the author of their own life, and that was the kind of freedom Sarah wanted to pass on. This new tradition didn't just transform Sarah's own life, it deeply impacted those around her as well. They began to feel the power of freedom of choice, and gradually, family gatherings became more relaxed and open. People no longer felt the need to hide who they were or change to please others. The stories shared weren't just fragments of the past, they were windows into each person's thoughts, dreams, and aspirations. The most precious thing Sarah discovered from these new traditions was the ability to create a safe, loving environment. Without the pressure of old expectations, people were free to live in the way that brought them the most joy and peace. She had built a family not just with blood, but with love, respect, and acceptance. Looking back, Sarah couldn't help but feel proud of the journey she had taken. She had left behind a family that didn't understand her to build a new one, where differences weren't something to fear or avoid, but something that made relationships more meaningful. The traditions she created weren't just a way to stay connected to the people she loved, they were a powerful message about freedom, acceptance, and unconditional love. As time went by, the changes in Sarah's life gradually became an inseparable part of her family's story. The days when she chose to walk away from her old life, rebuild everything from the ground up, and form a new family were no longer seen with doubt and disappointment by her relatives. Now looking back, they began to understand that everyone has the right to create their own path, and that no one, not even parents or children, should be limited by the imprints of the past. Seeing these shifts, Sarah's heart lit up. She knew that returning to her family wasn't just about reconciliation. It was a major step forward, an expansion of love and acceptance. Though her past with her family wasn't perfect, Sarah had realized genuine love could heal even the deepest wounds. And if there was ever a chance to rebuild that relationship, she would not hesitate to take it. Her relationship with her family had been tested through moments of tension and misunderstanding. But slowly, each family member began to see that Sarah was no longer the woman they used to know. She was no longer the fragile daughter who bowed under the weight of old expectations. Instead, Sarah had become a strong, independent woman, someone who had learned to love and accept herself and to extend that same acceptance to those around her. During one family gathering, Sarah decided to share the changes in her life. She spoke about her journey to find freedom, about the struggles, the failures, and the victories. She talked about the company she had built, the new family she had formed, and the traditions she had created. She no longer felt pressured to change in order to please others. She wanted her family to understand that life didn't have to follow old patterns, that each person had the right to live in a way that was true to themselves, as long as they caused no harm to others. That gathering marked the beginning of a true reconciliation between Sarah and her family. At first, there was still some hesitation among her relatives. But over time, they began to see the value in the decisions Sarah had made. The criticism and judgment faded, replaced by respect and acceptance. Sarah felt as though she had returned not just to her family in body, but also in spirit. She realized that the only real truth in life is the freedom to be oneself, and that nothing was more meaningful than sharing that freedom with the people you love. Around this time, Sarah also came to see that her old family wasn't just a group defined by blood ties. It could be a broader community. It could include friends and the people she had met along her journey. She began to build a space where anyone could come and feel welcome. She expanded her definition of family beyond biology to include relationships rooted in kindness and empathy. Gradually, the new traditions Sarah had started became a bridge that brought people together. Each sharing night, each Freedom Day, wasn't just a moment for individual expression. It was a time for compassion and support. Sarah's friends, along with her family members, became an essential part of her life. They faced challenges together, celebrated joys together, and supported one another through sadness. Together, they built a true family, one where love and acceptance were the foundation. Sarah didn't just transform herself, she redefined what family meant. She no longer saw family as a group she had to impress or chase after to meet outdated expectations. Instead, her family had become a place where differences were embraced and love was the most important value. She proved that family isn't only defined by blood, but also by the connection between people who share common values and dreams. It became a family where everyone could be their true selves, free from pressure to change or please others. In the end, Sarah realized that reconciliation isn't a destination, it's a continuous journey. True reconciliation with family doesn't come just from forgiving past mistakes, but from being open and willing to embrace change. She learned that every person has the right to carve out their own path. And no matter how challenging the past may have been, what matters is that we all have the power to start again, to build something better for ourselves and for those around us. Looking at her family today, Sarah feels both happiness and pride. She knows she has built a family not only through blood, but through love, acceptance, and belief in each person's potential. And this is the family she will always protect, nurture, and help grow. A true family, where freedom, acceptance, and unconditional love are at the heart of everything.